Hi everyone, this is BritSimon. Just want to give you an update. People have been asking me about the latest visa bulletin. What does it mean and why it's moving so slowly for Europe. Let's talk about that. Okay, so I've had lots of people concerned about the visa bulletin for Europe in particular. Europe appears to be moving a little bit slower than the other regions. Africa just had a big bump this VB, and Asia is doing well, exactly as I predicted, exactly the pace I predicted, I should say. Oceania is going faster than I predicted. South America is going at about the pace I predicted. So overall, all the regions are sticking to the predictions that I made back in July, and so I'm comfortable with those predictions still. No real need to change those, although there have been some factors which could affect the lottery in the bigger regions, Africa and Asia. So I'll talk about those in a moment. Europe, though, is another case. It's the visa bulletin only increased by a small amount this month, and in general it's behind where it should be from a visa bulletin perspective. But people are worrying about the visa bulletin too much. I always explain the analogy this way. If you have a 10-gallon bucket 10-gallon bucket, and you're filling it with water, you can fill that bucket fast or you can fill it slow. The bucket still holds 10 gallons, right? It doesn't matter the speed at which you fill it. So that's normally what I say to people in terms of don't worry about the pace of the visa bulletin. It's not the pace that's important, it's where it finishes is what's important, where the visa bulletin ends up. Now, we've had 4 months of 12 months of the visa bulletin. So we're a third of the way through. So you might think, if you don't understand how the numbers worked out, you might think that we should be 1/3 of the way through the numbers, and that's a logical but incorrect assumption for Europe, Asia and Africa. It doesn't work that way. Now it does work that way in South America and Oceania, and sure enough, if you multiplied their numbers by 3 from where they are now, from a third, both South America and Oceania would both be within the exact range they need to be in order to finish up at having interviewed everybody. Okay, so those two regions are somewhat unusual. The reason the other 3 regions are different, Oceania and South America are an exception. The reason for that is that the density of the cases in Africa, in Asia and in Europe is higher in the beginning ranges than it is in the ending ranges. Okay, so the number of cases per 1,000, if you like, in the first few thousand cases in Africa is relatively high compared to the last few thousand, where the density is much lower. To put that another way, let's say we know, for example, and these are real numbers, we know in Europe there are about 30,000 selectees. Okay, and we have a highest number that we've heard around about 55 to 57,000 in terms of case number. Every case number includes the principal and the derivatives. So from the 30,000 selectees, we know that there are probably around about 14,000, in big numbers, 14,000 distinct cases. Cases where there is a selectee who may be a single person or may be married, may have children, may not. There are around about 14,000 cases. That's my estimation at the moment. I don't have the data exactly, so I could be wrong by a little bit. Let's say it's 15,000 cases. Okay, there are still only 15,000 cases that are active real cases over the whole 55,000 case number range, right? So there are a lot of gaps. There are 40,000 case numbers that are just holes. They're called holes. The number of holes every 1,000 cases in the beginning is much higher in the ending ranges, rather. The number of holes is much higher in the ending ranges than the beginning. In other words, if you see the graph, you'll see number of cases per 1,000 start high and then over time go down. Okay, it looks a little bit like that. When I'm producing this video in my back garden, just enjoying the sun, but I'll put on, I'll switch to a graph that will show 2018. I'll display that when I edit the video. So 2018, 2019, any of the previous years will be like this. But essentially that's my point. The numbers for Europe and Africa and Asia start high, end up low. The reason is that there are some countries that are limited during the process. They're cut off before the end, and that's from countries that have massively high number of entries. They get so many entries that they reach a sensible number of winners much faster than other countries, and therefore they're limited in the later phases of the numbers, and don't any longer get any winners, right? So let's say you have Nepal with, let's say, a million entries. They will have reached their maximum number of selectees faster than the country with, let's say, 20,000 entries or 100,000 entries. So they're limited. Nepal is limited, Iran is limited. There are a number of limited countries in Europe and Africa. So every year we see the same phenomenon, and it's exactly the same thing. So that's something we've grown used to. But if you look at it another way, if we just forgot the graduating, the decline of number of cases per 1,000, if we just forget that for a moment and just look at Europe, back to my point, there are only 15,000 or 14,000 probably cases in the whole 55,000 number range. So something like 25%. So if you had a flat line, it would be you'd only have 250 cases per 1,000 in every one of those 55,000 blocks of numbers, right? So in order to move, at the point that they've released numbers to 10, for Europe is around about 10,000. For that number, they've probably only revealed, I would say, just guessing now because of the sort of graduation, just guessing, let's say they've revealed about 4,000 real actual cases, if that, right? So what has happened? Why are they going slow? So a couple of things have changed, right? So the way they're doing the document email has changed in recent months, but also very recently there's been another change. So the document procedure has only been in place since the beginning of 2019, and it's now required that you send your documents normally after you've sent your DS-260, you would be contacted by KCC to send your documents, which are the bare minimum documents, to KCC for a verification before they'll schedule the interview. What's changed very recently, in the last month or so, is that they have emailed every winner, as far as I can tell, every winner that was in the DV 2020 batch. Sorry, my dog wants to throw the ball. Here, ball. I'm sitting out here with my dog throwing the ball. I'll show you later. So they've emailed everybody with a DV 2020 case, and that has done something a little bit different to every other year that we've been looking at. It's alerted some people that didn't know they were winners. It's alerted those people to the fact that they were a winner. Okay, and some people have got an email They haven't filled in their DS260. They perhaps did or didn't know they were a winner, but anyway, they've got an email from KCC saying send your documents in. Now, that will change the response rate of the number of winners, and that could have an effect both in Africa, Asia, and also in Europe. It could have an effect on the process this year, and it's only happened in the last month or so, so my previous predictions didn't take that into account because it hadn't happened yet. Right? Some people will wonder why I didn't build this in, but it hadn't happened yet was the point. So this is a recent change. So what am I talking about with the response rate? Okay, so in a normal year, you would take the number of selectees and you'd find out the number of cases, and I've done that, and you know, in Europe there are 30,000 selectees roughly, and I calculate around about, based on previous years, around about 14,000 cases. Of those 14,000 cases, not all the cases would respond. In any given year, not all of them will respond. And they won't this year, they won't all respond this year. But the rate at which they respond is normally fairly predictable. I've already said in a previous video, I've explained that I expect the response rate to be slightly higher this year than in previous years, because there was an obvious change in the process from a security point of view with the draw that eliminated more of the winners right at the beginning, before the announcement of the results was even made. Right, so there are more holes this year, hence that 15,000 winners, which is very similar to last year, in this year is a much higher number. Even though it's the same number of winners, or a very similar number of winners, right? So, whoops, okay. Bull, good girl. So there's been, you know, I already knew the the response rate was going to be slightly higher, but in any given year there would be some people who wouldn't respond because they have won the lottery, but they were never really serious about it. They think about it, and perhaps they don't have the money to go through the process, or they've, you know, since found a good job where they live back in the country, or whatever reason, they decide they don't want to go forward with the lottery process. That will be the same case this year. There will be some percentage of cases that will never get filed. They'll never, the people will never send in their DS260 or their documents. They just won't proceed. That's normal. But this, in any normal year, there would also be some people that forgot to check their entry, or couldn't check their entry, or, you know, whatever it might be. They perhaps were entered by Poppy. They were entered into the lottery by an agent, and perhaps the agent hasn't given them the details to check their entry. In this year, those winners would have been notified by this letter from KCC asking for the documents. That's a new thing that's happening in the last month or so. So so the number of people who respond will be higher in DV 2020 than it has been in previous years. So that could have an effect, and I don't know how much effect that will have, but if you imagine we start off with the 30,000 selectees, in a normal year probably less than 20,000 of those would proceed on their individual cases. Probably around about 8,000 to 9,000 cases would proceed. This year it could be 1,000 or two more cases. Now, I'm not terribly worried about that for Europe. I'm not worried about that for Africa, as I've already explained, and Asia is a different case anyway. It's got so many, Asia has got so many people affected by the travel ban that Asia can't really meet or exceed its limits. Nepal can, by the way. Nepal is a separate case, but and I've talked about that separately. But Asia can't really meet its allocated number of visas. Africa possibly can, but it's most likely to hit the limit on Egypt rather than other countries. I don't think other countries will hit the per country cap. But Africa as a whole, I would say probably can't meet the limit, which means that I expect Africa to go current, with the exception of Egypt. Europe, on the other hand, has probably high levels of motivation in some of the Eastern European countries. High levels of motivation of people that when they win the lottery they want to proceed with that lottery. They are the type of people that will move. In Western Europe, France, Germany, Spain, those countries, they have few entries, few winners, and the motivation levels are lower because people in those countries are perhaps less in need of a move, and so they take their opportunity less often. But I do expect high interest from Eastern Europe. And there are no reasons why Eastern Europe candidates couldn't not proceed with the process. They generally have enough money, or can get enough money to go through the process, get the travel arrangements and everything else. They can go through this process. So the number of people actually proceeding from the 30,000 original selectees, or 14 or 15,000 cases, could be higher than a normal year. So we may see some sort of cut-off towards the end for Europe. A lot of it depends on how KCC handle the cases during the year, how they proceed with the cases, etc., and how far they're prepared to go with the number of visas issued. You should know by now that there has been an increase in the number of visas available this year. In previous years there was a 50,000 nominal cap. This year it's 55,000 essentially. So there are 10% more visas available. Those visas will be spread amongst all of the regions, and so the allocation for Europe has gone up a little bit, as well as for Africa or Asia or Oceania or South America. So each region has a little bit more, a few more visas available to them, and so that's a good thing. That helps. Those visas were not available to previous year's candidates, and we've got similar number of selectees as in previous years. So it really comes down to how many people respond, which will be higher this year, how many people are successful at interview, which I expect will be higher this year because there'll be less fraudulent entries. They've introduced some new security measure last year that has disqualified a lot more cases. So there could be a case where less people are needed to fill the allocation of visas. So that's talking about the end game. Now go back to my bucket analogy. I'm talking about the ending number. That's not to do with the visa bulletin month to month. People worry too much about the month-to-month progress, as I mentioned earlier, because it's just like filling the bucket. The bucket is still the same size, and you've got the same amount of water to fill it, right? That's what I'm talking about when I talk about the number of cases allocated for, Europe, number of visas available, I should say, and then the number of people who will proceed and be approved and so on. So a lot of it hasn't changed, but there are the changes that I've mentioned. Now, what does happen on a month-to-month basis? The way the visa bulletin is created with the number is they decide how many cases they have capacity to handle at the embassies. So they have a number of appointments they would like to make, and they, plus or minus a few, it doesn't matter, but generally speaking they have a number of cases that they know they can make appointments for, and then they move the visa bulletin number to capture enough cases that are ready for interview in order to fill that allocation of embassy appointments. Okay, now in a month where they've probably got a lot more people who've sent in their documents now than back in October and earlier in November. They will have had people who've sent in their documents now who were already current in previous months, but are now ready for scheduling. That's probably been a bigger factor in Europe than it was in Africa. So this prompting of people to send in the documents has probably meant that out of those early cases, more people are ready for scheduling now than there were before, and so they didn't need to move the visa bulletin number quite as dramatically as they would have done otherwise. So that's essentially why the number is lower. Now, ready for scheduling means you've submitted your DS-260 and you've sent in your documents. Okay, so there's two things, not just the DS-260. Two things have to be true, and you have to be current, of course. So more people under 10,000 are now current and ready for interview because their DS-260 is processed and their documents have been received and processed. And so that's basically why Europe has gone a little slower than the other regions. Other regions, Africa notoriously and traditionally is slower to react as a region to changes such as sending in documents from this email that they've received. It's going to take longer to get those documents in Africa. People are slower to react in Africa to these sort of changes. Some people helping other people, will have been slower. Internet connectivity availability is less in Africa. So for all sorts of reasons, Africa selectees are going to be slower to respond. We may therefore see Africa getting a little slower in the next couple of visa bulletins than they would not ordinarily have been. Although I still expect fast progress, generally speaking. The number of people in each 1,000 cases is very low in Africa, in particular, and so there needs to be fast progress on the visa bulletin to make all those cases current. So anyway, that's generally an explanation. Like I said, people need to relax. We're 4 months in. It's a 12-month process. There are 8 visa bulletins. It's far too soon to be panicking or freaking out because your number's not current and you expected it to be. You have to have patience in this process. There's no other option. It's a long process anyway. But you have to be patient and not panic when the visa bulletin doesn't give you the number that you hope or calculated or expected. And generally speaking, trying to predict what the visa bulletin will do is it's a complex thing, and it's a bit of a fool's game because we don't really know what's going on at KCC. We can only guess and try and analyse what's happened based on what just did happen. Predicting what's about to happen is much harder. And so, I don't want anybody to worry about that. So we should see faster progress in Europe, for sure, over the next 2 or 3 months. But wait for a while, don't panic. Let's see what the next 2 or 3 months brings, and we can talk about it again. Is there a possibility that there'll be a cut-off in Europe? Well, probably more so than there would have been a month ago. If you'd have asked me a month ago, I'd have said absolutely not. Every case in Europe was going to be current. Now I have to be a little bit more cautious because of the change that's happened where they've sent the document email out to everyone. It's changed things a bit. So we just have to see how things go. Okay, so I hope that's helped. I hope that's explained a little bit. I'm sitting here with my dog throwing the ball anyway. I thought I may as well record a video and let you know my thoughts about the visa bulletin. Some people have been asking. So there you go. Alright. Have a nice day. Have a great weekend. And we'll speak again soon. Bye now.